Hello friends and welcome to Sustainable Prepping, your home for fear-free emergency preparedness and a sustainable life. My name is Brecky, and today we're going to be jumping into 2023 with our very first laundry chat, starting the year off right, and starting the year talking about women in prepping or women in emergency preparedness. I want to say a great big welcome if you're new. I'm so glad you found the slice of internet. I'm so glad you're starting 2023 with me. And with this conversation and a casual laundry chat, you can't see it, but I have a pile of laundry and I've been working on it already. We're just going to talk about women in prepping very casually. If you're not new, as always, welcome back. Thank you so much for showing up for me and being a part of this community. We are close to hitting 2,000 subscribers. I'm so excited. When we get to 2,000 subscribers, I'm going to be doing a massive Q&A. Anything you want to know, I'll be doing a huge Q&A. So you tell a friend, tag a friend, send this to a friend so we can get to that big 2,000 mark. I'm so excited. Thank you for supporting me. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into a laundry chat. And I do legitimately fold my laundry. This is a way for me to make videos while getting chores done. And anybody who has ever raised children, anybody on a homestead, anybody who's a homemaker, anybody who just has life chores knows that when you can double up and do something you love, which is make videos and talk to you all, with something you don't love as much, which is fold laundry, everybody wins. Tonight it's kind of late. It is, well, right now it is 10:38 p.m. as I am filming this. And the kids are asleep. It's been a big day. I have a ton of laundry and it was just getting out of control. I have like 4 things of clean laundry, but I wasn't folding them. So I decided, you know what? I don't want to do this. I want to talk to y'all. And I want to talk to y'all about women in prepping or emergency preparedness because this is a very masculine space. I looked at some of the biggest channels in prepping, channels like Canadian Prepping, Nate over at Canadian Prepping, Chris at City Prepping. I can't think of his name at Full Spectrum Survival. You know, big channels. There's Curtis over at the Urban Prepper. He's not in the big ones anymore because he's not doing quite as many videos as he used to, but he's still a very well-known channel. And most of these big popular channels are men. Now, they may involve their spouses. I think about like the Casual Preppers podcast. They're very popular and they occasionally bring on their wives, but women are always secondary in these channels. And there's not a lot of channels where a woman is the lead, right? I'm tiny. So there's just not a lot of us where the woman is the lead. Now, there are a couple that have good followings. Rogue Preparedness is a good one. But there's not a lot of us. And I've been thinking about this and about what it means to get into prepping, to be a prepper, to do emergency preparedness, and what that means to do it as a woman. And how, if you are a woman specifically, you're going to prepare differently, and why it doesn't help necessarily for a woman to get her advice from a man. And I wanted to unpack that. I was thinking, is it really true? Am I just biased? But then I was really considering the things that I learned from a lot of these guys, and with really truly, the exception is Chris over at City Prepping, who I recommend him always as far as the big channels, he's my favorite. He's the only one I really recommend. Because he's so even-handed and he has a very moderate approach, and he tries to be fear-free most of the time. And what I have kind of reflected on as I've thought about the channels I used to follow, I still follow, the ones that were headed by women, the ones that were headed by men and are headed by men, and their approaches, and that is women often take a very defensive stance in their preparedness. And what does that mean? They are not trying to preemptively get ahead of violence. They are not going to emphasize self-defense. Well, that's not true. They're not going to emphasize a lot of the tactical pieces. So the practicing rucking, for example. creating a mag and practicing with weaponry for evasive maneuvers, offensive or defensive maneuvers. That is not going to be the approach that the majority of women take, because women are not thinking about that most of the time. I guess I should state a big caveat that, like, I don't want to speak for all women, and I'm going to use the terms woman and man because I don't know of any non-gender binary folk who are in this space, and so I don't want to speak for that community at all. I will speak in terms of women and men, but that's not meant to be exclusionary, and I'm sorry if it is. But with that caveat in mind, I don't want to speak for all women everywhere, but the majority of women who do prepping information are often doing it from a hearth and home perspective, which is my perspective. Because even as a feminist who, I've gone out and made my own money for my entire adulthood, and, it is only in the last couple of months that I have had a husband who is like the breadwinner and I have been home. I still have found my natural inclination, because I've been socialized, is to think about food, water, medicine, home security in a physical sense, the well-being of the children, the education of the children, that kind of stuff. And because I am the one who stocks the pantry, uses the pantry, buys the majority of the groceries, manages that budget, I am very attuned to what we eat, how much we eat, what we're going through, what we have, what we don't have, in a way that my husband is like not aware. And this is true in most households still. I don't remember the statistics, but I follow a couple of people who talk about the mental load of women and all this kind of stuff. And women still, by and large, run households. Even women who have careers, who work outside the home, they're still responsible for the mental load of like knowing what foods people eat, and doing the grocery shopping or doing the grocery pickup, or assigning someone that task. And so women are still doing the work of housekeeping, right, of homemaking, even if they're not homemakers. They're just sort of doing all that work plus a career, and that's another video for another time. But I say that to point out the reason why women's approach to preparedness is very home-based, very hearth-based, and men's tends to be very aggressive, defensive, almost projective-based. And so what does that mean as we go into 2023? I want to say this is a space welcoming for everyone, but I'm focused on women and minorities and creating an approach to emergency preparedness that is not hyper-masculine, that doesn't carry some of that toxic masculinity. And by toxic masculinity, I mean the overly aggressive forms of masculinity that show up when men feel afraid, right? A lot of men respond to fear with violence. They respond to fear with aggression, because fear is an unacceptable feeling. You respond with aggression. And so a lot of prepping content then has this very aggressive attitude, angry, sometimes offensive, sometimes just very a need to catastrophize in a way that's not useful. And as a woman, how do we create a space where we approach preparedness from a place of common confidence, which you hear a lot on my channel, a place of empowerment, which I believe prepping allows and encourages, but also a place of community building rather than community fear, right? Community, I'm trying to think of the word, community suspicion. And how do we create prepping as not fringe, but rather commonplace? Because to me, that's the goal. Like, my goal is that 1 million women, or non-gender identifying individuals, prep. I would love to know at the end of whenever I finish this career in teaching emergency preparedness that I've gotten and encouraged and helped support 1 million people in prepping. And they're all people who weren't necessarily interested. Like, that is my dream. Imagine if 10% more people across the United States were prepared for a 3-month-long emergency. Just imagine how much better off we would all be. So as I think about this, how do we approach it from a particularly feminine, non-toxic perspective, right? How do we go back and think about this from these terms, from this alternative space? And I think the approach, I've done several videos, and I'll try to make sure to link them above. But I've done videos on why feminists should prep and installation of choice. And that's really key, right? The whole reason you should be prepping is so that when the emergency comes, and an emergency is going to happen, you have choices, you have options. You are not beholden to whatever emergency may or may not show up, emergency response team. I hope they do. I hope we have good local, state, and national governments that respond to our emergencies. This whole "you're going to be alone," I think, is so disheartening, right? And I don't think is necessarily true, but they might be underserved. You may not get the support you need. There might be people who have way more need than you. And so if you take the time to prepare ahead, you are not a drain on the resources that may be there. And this, to me, is very feminine, right? It's a very womanly thing to do, because women are constantly having to negotiate how to care for families when there are hiccups in plans. And this is just taking that whole perspective of hiccups in plans and extending it to very big hiccups. Not little Jimmy ate all of the tortilla chips, and so now we don't have that for our, Frito pie or whatever, to, okay, well, there has been a blackout for 3 days, and so how are we going to be managing our food stores, and what are we going to be eating, and how are we going to be eating through what's in our fridges? I think that women already do so much of this mental work that they're very well equipped to be preppers if we can get information into their hands that doesn't shut them down with fear and anxiety. So all of this to say is, how do we get more women into prepping? How do we approach preparedness education from a feminine standpoint, talking about the topics specifically that impact women and that women are interested in? How do we continue to be empowering and fear-free while touching on the major issues so that we're not shying away from the hard things? And how do we approach the entire process of education with women in mind, right? For me, it's partially the topics. You're not going to find a lot of defense and offense material on this channel for a host of reasons. Aside from the fact that I have made a personal decision not to get really deep into firearms for a host of reasons, I am curious about, how we have those discussions, what topics are best for women, food storage and water storage and medical care and community building, things like that. But what else? I'd love your comments. If you have topics you'd love to see me cover, I would be very, very interested in doing more. Key really is going to be about how do we insulate our choices? How do we support women in thinking about prepping choices and thinking about their options and being empowered to make statements and choose options? And how do we just help women tie that into what they're already doing, and then empower them to delegate and get support from partners and so on and so forth. But how do we just turn it into what is normal so it doesn't feel like a monumental task to be prepped? How do we teach a lot of the essential skills that make prepping so much more effective, like scratch cooking and handiwork and community building and being in touch with local resources? All of these things are skills that need to be taught. I know that sounds wild, but they really are. And so what role does some of this, skill making play? What role does this idea of feminist homemaking play in teaching preparedness from a feminine perspective, from two women from a woman's perspective, with the cares that most women carry? Again, I think a lot of women naturally have one kind of eye watching for bumps in the road. We've just gotten really accustomed to and have been told that we have a very secure economy. Marie Kondo teaches us to think of The purchase price for repurchasing something that you've decluttered as the rental fee, that is her perspective, is that, for example, you use a glue gun for a project, you're not planning on using it again for a while, you may not have any projects lined up, may not be someone who crafts regularly, and so she recommends you donate that glue gun that you've used. And then whenever you need it again, you just repurchase it, because the purchase price is the rent you pay to not have it in your house, which I think is insane. For a lot of reasons. One of them is a low waste reason that creates a ton of waste in the economy, a ton of things that are just going to end up in landfills that are perfectly useful, and makes me really sick. But the second reason is, like, you have to trust that that store is always going to be there, and that the purchase price isn't going to go up exponentially to the point where it's no longer within your purchasing power. Like, that's wild. So I think that's a mixed narrative that needs to be combated. I think minimalism can be helpful, but also can become very unhealthy. And all of this is marketed to women. All of this is marketed to women. And so I think, where does preparedness come into there and say, actually, having a minimalist pantry isn't great? You should have a month of food in your working pantry and at least 3 months of food in your midterm pantry, and then maybe think about a long-term pantry of stuff you don't plan on touching for like 20 years. That should be normal. Like, why don't we give housewarming presents of like buckets of rice? Do you know, I would love that when we finally buy a house. We're looking for a house. The housing market is still terrible. It's the most miserable experience of my life. But when I finally get that house, do you know what I really want? I want everybody to either bring me like plants for the garden or like prepper stuff. Bring me a 55-gallon drum. Like, everybody get together and just buy me one. You know what I'm saying? Like, bring me a bucket of oats. I would love that. Bring me a couple pounds of sugar. In fact, actually, back in the day when preachers were kind of itinerant and they used to like come and settle in town, and preachers didn't make a lot of money, the way you would welcome a preacher was what was called a pounding. And everybody would come, and all your parishioners would bring you a pound of something, a pound of flour, a pound of sugar, a pound of bacon, a pound of butter. Like, it was called a pounding. And they would pound the door with a pound of stuff. This happened to a friend of mine when they were at a church in Alabama. So it still happens, but that's, this idea that you bring a housewarming gift of something very practical, a pound of flour and a pound of sugar, a pound of butter, man, you can make biscuits all day long, right? So thinking about how do we, okay, you and me, how do we begin to shift the culture and make it more preparedness friendly? By doing stuff like this, make it more feminist homemaking friendly, make it more reusable friendly, make it more useful gift friendly, make it an economy that doesn't need kitsch, make it more sustainable. I think they're all tied together, y'all. And I think women are this linchpin, because women are at this crux of economic power. We still control the purse strings of the home, even if we have a spouse who is this big umbrella who may or may not approve purchases. You're still the one doing the grocery shopping, doing the meal planning, doing the budgeting, doing this, that, and the other. And you're making the decisions about disposables and not disposables, and about, where you put your purchasing power. And you're making the plan about how you're caring for your family and what's worth investing in. And can you squirrel away money to, build your stockpile? And, like, however you approach it, whether or not you've got big spending power or a small spending power, women are still this linchpin. And what if our community could help reach women, help them direct that spending power towards low waste and sustainable choices, towards renewable choices that support their emergency preparedness, towards skills and making choices that support their skills and support their families and support local economies, making choices that empower them to have as many choices as possible, no matter what the future holds. What if this community could do that? This is the stuff I hope for. And how can an intentionally feminine and feminist approach to prepping do that? Do that. Y'all, it is the beginning of the year. I have a lot of hope. There's a lot of stuff that's anxiety-inducing in the news right now. And I am filming this early, so who knows by the time this actually hits the internet waves what will already be rolled out. But I look forward to this community and to being with you, being in these laundry chat community conversations, reading your comments, and doing my best to support the work of empowering you, of empowering more women, of empowering people who want to approach emergency preparedness as a lifestyle change with an eye towards sustainability, with an eye towards feminist inclusion, and with an eye towards knowing that there's going to be emergencies and knowing they are prepared for them so they can lead with confidence. That is my dream. That is my dream. I think it's a beautiful dream. It's a small dream, but I think it's a beautiful dream. So thank you for joining me. I still have 2 more baskets of laundry to fold, but I'm not going to talk your ears off while I do that. If you like this conversation and you want to keep it going, please leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see on this channel. Let me know what your perspective about how we can approach preparedness in a feminine and feminist way. I'd love to know your thoughts and what you think of that. You can always keep the conversation going over on Instagram at sustainable_prepping and in the Facebook group. My friends, I hope that you have a wonderful beginning of 2023. I hope you have a good night. It is now 11 o'clock. I'm tired. I'm going to head to bed. But until the next video, happy prepping.